All right, all right. Hello, everybody. We're going to go back in time just a little bit, tell a little story about some influential clubs that helped make jazz happen, man, made it spread and all that. So I'm going to talk about pivotal period, right around 1900. This is after Reconstruction, and things in the South have gotten Southern. You got all neo-Confederates, all that kind of thing going on. So you got a whole lot of people, mostly people who have a history of slavery in their background, leaving the South, like 6 million people. Yeah, that's a few. And all went north because of the Jim Crow laws and Jim Crow treatment that was taking place all across the South in these years. A lot of these jazz musicians did not leave headed north until after Storyville closed in 1917. But the quest for freedom and opportunity precedes the closing of Storyville. Reconstruction lasted from essentially 1865, 1866 to 1875. After that, things got kind of testy. So by 1900, there was already quite a few northern cities that were getting, as some people would say, invaded by Southerners, including jazz musicians. And this was especially true of Chicago with the railways and the commerce and whatnot. It was fine for it. So this new music that was emerging, primarily in the South, this hot jazz, New Orleans kind of thing, it was there in Chicago before Storyville ever closed it down. And you started having ballrooms opening up as early as 1910 to accommodate this new music, these new styles, these new mores, these new dances, and all of that. One of the earliest and most successful set on Chicago's north side, on the west side of Broadway, and it opened in 1910. So by the time Louis Armstrong and people like that got to Chicago, this place was already booming and was halfway through its reign as one of the top clubs in Chicago for dancing. Now, later I'm going to do a New York club, and I will highlight some of the big differences between these two venues. But this club, the Arcadia, is in Chicago. And with this immigration of people who come from the South and the North, there were some people who were comforted by it and some people who were not. And pretty soon, Chicago had its own form of apartheid. It was South Chicago was where the black folks live, and North Chicago is where they didn't live, and probably wasn't advisable to travel there either. But there's this club, the Arcadia, has solidly owned the north side. It's in the uptown area. And for those of you who don't know, I got all this background information, the uptown area wasn't really happening that much until rail came through. An elevated rail came through Chicago in the early part of the 20th century. And that last stop was in an area that grew up to become the Uptown District, which is where all the jazz clubs and great restaurants and everything was on the north side, not on the south side. That's a whole different thing. But you see, things are changing in this country. Communication is getting so much better. So you got a lot of young white kids who would come down to the south side to hear some real blues, or hear some rhythm and blues, or hear some jazz, and they would fall in love with it. And soon there was a demand for jazz on the north side where only the white folks live. Now, Chicago was quite uncomfortable with this transition of its city. And most of the club owners had a strict black-white policy that sounded something like this. If whites are here, no blacks are here. That's the kind of way that was. but not the Arcadia. Whereas a lot of the early ballrooms were using the big orchestras that became popular in the swing era in the 30s, the Arcadia used small, black, all black jazz groups. Yeah. Pops may have played there. Lil Hardy may have played there. A lot of people played there in these early jazz bands. They came, and the white kids would come out to dance to these black jazz bands because they preferred that rhythmic music, that excitement, more than they preferred the orchestral type music of, say, a Benny Goodman or, Paul Whiteman or whatever. So this thing is working great because this is one of the few places where there is a rather casual grouping of people across racial lines, and it was a happy place. People are getting it. It was really, really popular. People would section themselves off on the dance floor and have dance contests. And the best dancers, the ones who considered themselves the best, the men were called the sheiks, and the ladies were called the shebas. And many relationships started out with a sheik watching a sheba do her thing and liking the way she moved on the floor and deciding to get to know her a little better. But soon they would become dance partners, and then partners on and off the dance floor. So that's another one of the great attractions of the Arcadia was a dance, and they had all these dance contests. And it wasn't about who had the latest technique or who danced more like this or more like that. These contests were about originality. So the people who had the most creative steps, the people who had the wildest moves, the people who had hops and jumps and skips, the people whose feet and bodies were moving to the jazz, they were the ones who were winning these dance contests. Now, there's another side to this Arcadia Ballroom as well. You see, the guy who opened this was a businessman. And there was another craze taking place right alongside the jazz craze, and that was roller skating. Yeah, I know, come on, roller skating. Okay, it was big when I was a kid, but I'm not a kid anymore. So, but man, in the early parts of this 20th century, late 1910s to 1920s, roller skating was a big craze. So you had this Arcadia Ballroom that was dancing to black jazz music, and then shutting down the dance floor on other nights just for the roller skaters. And it was so popular as a roller skating deal that there were actually male and female roller skate champions. And the champions in Illinois, the female champions, they actually had a lot of their biggest home matches at the Arcadia Ballroom. Now, it's important to know that even when you were there for the boxing match, you still heard jazz. Even when you were there for the dancing of any sort, you still heard jazz. This was important. But you see, the businessman, did I say businessman? Yeah, businessman. Patty Harmon. Okay, doesn't sound like a conventional businessman. You know, they had businesses that were legitimate, and they had businesses that were on the down low. Because in somebody's infinite wisdom, a law was passed that you couldn't drink adult beverages. Prohibition, it was called. And the worst thing you can do is try to stop a grown man from drinking what he wanted to drink. So it didn't work out so well. But so you had all these speakeasies and things like that as well. So for the Arcadia to do as well as it did in this period, it's pretty amazing. The owner, Patty, had other interests. Businessman. He owned the Dreamland Ballroom as well. Oh yeah, he had himself 2 ballrooms. And he also owned Chicago Stadium. Yeah, so he was into the jazz, he was into the roller skating, and he was also into sports. And there were times when sports won. Let's just take, time is rolling, things are starting to change, moving toward New York. We just went through the Depression and all that thing, and in 1929, everything started crashing, and boom, 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 here we go. So in the 30s, the Arcadia became pretty much a full-time sports arena. One of the greatest historic facts that clings to them is that they were the site of three successive bouts in 1934 with the Brown Bomber, Mr. Joe Louis himself. And they say Joe Louis had 3 fights there. He won all 3. This year, Joe Louis. He's on his way to becoming the heavyweight champion. And 2 of the 3 were by knockouts. Bottom line is, you walk into the ring and you immediately kiss the floor. That's what happened with him. 2 out of 3 of the fights he fought. So during that period when things were kind of thin and whatnot, Roddy was a businessman. Yes, he had the sense to find this little known boxer named Joe Louis. And that is how we got this situation where sports took over. And let's face it, Joe launched his career with those 3 bouts. So this club is more than just something for jazz. It was a gathering area for the new culture that is developing in Chicago. Based on what the economic climate was, it became more of a jazz club in some years and more of a sports roller skating venue in others. I recall when I was a little younger and I was living up north in a place called Erie, Pennsylvania, one of my favorite clubs was in a place called Youngstown, Ohio. Youngstown had been a boom town with all the steel and whatnot, and you had people who had stuff. Black folks had stuff, yeah. So as late as, let's see, I got there around 1970, so I say mid-70s, I'm going to play one of the proudest gigs I ever played. They were bringing in some of the biggest R&B artists, Millie Jackson and, Shaka Khan and all that, and it was a black-owned skating rink and concert dance venue. And it was called Young's Arena. And it is patterned almost exactly from the earlier model of the Arcadia in Chicago's north side. So this practice was not all that plentiful, but smart people all over the country started developing venues that could easily be transitioned from one thing to another thing, and these big skating arenas were great for dancing, for skating, for athletics, and for jazz. Everybody came through the Arcadia because it was so big and so popular. A close to it was in 26 when the Oregon opened. A lot of the clients from the Arcadia started going to Oregon, and that's probably how by the 30s you started having an emphasis on boxing because the trends had changed for the Arcadia, just by way of explanation. The Arcadia continued to do its thing, and along Green Mill in Chicago, another very important, I guess I may call it integrated, jazz club in Chicago. The North Side started booming in a couple places where you could actually have white clients and black jazz musicians, and eventually it became quite common. Eventually. Well, Chicago was one of the first, and the Arcadia was one of the first. It continued to do its thing Roddy Harmon could move it this way, could move it that way, could do boxing, could do roller skating, could do jazz, could do big band, could do it all. But somewhere around the 50s, things got kind of slow. And let's see. Yeah. January 4th, 1959, the Arcadia Ballroom burned to the ground. Now, I'm not trying to suggest anything. I don't have any facts. But you know that it was quite common for mob-owned places to burn when the books didn't look good. Oh, yeah. So when it showed too much red in the book, you'd have a big red fire happening in the next few days. Okay, so that's my story of this venue in Chicago that probably launched the career of many black jazz musicians and helped to make the transition of Chicago from a one-dimensional city to a city of diversity as it remains to this very day. And it's important to know that this was pretty much the launching pad for jazz as we know it becoming a national phenomenon. Thank you very much.